Do you want your business to grow faster? Are you open to new and out-of-the-box ways to drive revenues and increase value? How do you imagine the most successful entrepreneurs and business leaders double, triple, or expand their businesses tenfold or more? The answer is deals. This is a weekly podcast featuring conversations with business owners, executives, and leaders as we reveal behind-the-scenes details that give you, our listeners, the confidence to pursue your own deal-driven growth. On this show, we discuss a huge variety of deals, everything from large, complex mergers and acquisitions, capital raising, joint ventures, strategic alliances, real estate, affiliate and sponsorship deals, franchising, and more. My name is Corey Kupfer, and I've been supporting deal-driven growth for businesses for over 35 years as a successful entrepreneur, professional negotiator, and attorney. My goal is to help you strategize, plan for, find, and complete deals that will help your company grow faster. Welcome to the Deal Quest podcast. Let's get started. Hikari Senju is a computer science graduate from Harvard University with a passion for technology and design. He founded his first startup, Quick Help, on an on-demand tutoring app, which he later sold to Yup.com and became head of growth. During his time at Yup.com, Senju observed inefficiencies in content spending and the potential of AI in advertising, which inspired him to establish Omneky in 2018. Senju's background in computer science, entrepreneurship, and his experience with AI technologies led him to create Omneky, an AI platform that generates, analyzes, and optimizes personalized ad creatives at scale. Welcome to the podcast. I'm excited to have you on.
Thanks for having me, Corey. Really excited as well.
Excellent. So, Senju, I want to obviously talk about the company. I want to talk about your experience with deals, which includes sale of a prior company, raising capital, various things like that. But before we get to any of that, I want to take you back to when you were a little kid, maybe 8, 10, 12 years old growing up, because, what did you want to be during that time? I'm assuming, even though you are younger than me, that AI wasn't it back then because it didn't exist. But what did you want to be when you were a kid?
Well, growing up in Westchester, New York, near the IBM headquarters, my grandfather had worked at IBM. He was an executive there. And so I always kind of knew I wanted to be in technology. I really was excited. And I also always knew that I liked building things and making things. Yeah, early on, a lot of architectural diagrams. I would kind of paper mache buildings together and draw structures. I'd compose music. I'm a creator. I'm a creative person. And I think I also got that from my dad, who's a painter, and he's an artist. And so I think I always wanted my career to be at some intersection of art and technology, making things ultimately. Which is both in the craft of making things, making products, creating experiences for people. And so that I knew that I wanted to be creative. I knew that I had this creative drive and I was very excited about. And I think this is also the kid growing up, you hear about Moore's Law and how the world changes every 6 months or, definitely true today more than ever, but definitely the exponential rate in which the world changes due powered by technology. And you just see that kind of almost at the front row seat to that growing up. It makes you realize that, if I want to have an exciting, impactful, creative life, it's probably at the intersection of technology and making cool products. And so that, I think I did have a pretty good sense I wanted to be involved in earlier. I think so. So therefore I studied computer science. I got into Harvard and MIT and Princeton, and I ended up going to Harvard to study computer science. And I was also taking a lot of AI coursework at MIT because AI was, I think, the hot thing. Sure. Graduating in 2015. So, even though it's now we're talking, 2011, 2015, AI is becoming very hot. There's major breakthroughs being made in image recognition in particular around late 2000s and then definitely early 2010s. Deep neural networks are becoming very, very popular. And so therefore I got really into AI in college through studying computer science. And also again, growing up, robotics competitions as a kid, programming robots to compete in these obstacle courses. And so kind of, again, early affinity for making things and programming things through computers. And so studied computer science, got into AI. But I was also very entrepreneurial. So my uncle actually is an entrepreneur in, kind of a more smallish SaaS company it was kind of like an very, very early version of Slack or Yammer at the time.
Okay.
And so I also was very interested in, I interned at his small company. It was like maybe 10 people there and he got and that was in high school. And I got really excited about the idea of starting a company and being an entrepreneur in technology. And so I started 2 venture-backed companies in college. One of which was in education, was a personalized learning application that company received funding grants from Harvard and MIT. We won some competitions. We received some venture capital from some student-oriented funds, and ultimately grew and sold that company to another company in the Bay Area where I became head of marketing. And so I was there running marketing combined with my passion in Gen AI and generative art in particular, that I had this opportunity to start Omneky back in 2018. But yeah, the real seminal moment really is, I think, this lecture at MIT, I think senior year, I'm seeing early AI generating art, like very early kind of hallucinogenic artwork, and really being like wowed by that. The idea of, if an AI can be creative, if it can generate art, then it's going to have massive disruptions in various industries. And so kind of generative art in particular became like a core passion and focus of mine at the end of college. And then it kind of was following up with the research and following up with the open source community and reading some papers, and then really feeling like this is the next thing I wanted to build my company around. And so and so that was kind of what got me to start the company back in 2018.
Yeah, I love it. So, I mean, so obviously you were comparatively early, or pretty early, in the whole AI conversation, but even earlier, you knew that you wanted to play a role in technology as a kid. So that's interesting. I'm always interested in people's backstories. The way I always thought the podcast that way, and sort of just what our natural inclinations are. I mean, I've talked in the past how, like, growing up, my brother was always the one who could like fix stuff, build stuff, whatever, less from a technology point of view, but he ended up becoming an architect, right? And it was like, that was his thing. Whereas like, I'm going back years ago, like he could take a transistor radio apart that didn't work, put it back together as an 8-year-old kid, and it would work, right? Like, I couldn't even conceive to do that, but I had, different skills that led me to do what I do as a lawyer. So I'm always fascinated by that, where that comes from. And then the conversation of entrepreneurship, where that comes from or not, because I had really no models for entrepreneurship, but never wanted to work for somebody the rest of my life. And other people do have models, like you had your uncle, very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think definitely who your role models are early in life, and your kind of nature versus nurture. And I think, nurture is a big part of it. And I think I was also very lucky to have supportive parents that were like, go for it. And like, you should do what you're interested in doing. And that was, like, that's also a great, very lucky thing as well. And so, yeah, I think at the same time, whether you're a lawyer constructing deals, or an entrepreneur constructing companies, or you're a builder constructing products, I mean, I think there is this kind of urge to make things and to create a legacy and an impact in the world through what you make. And some of those products could be intangible, but in fact, the economy today, right, is mostly driven by the value is mostly intangible. And so, I mean, I think, we can say that we're all creators here.
I believe that. And I think actually the best in any field, people tend to have this, a lot of this distinction, or, like between somebody who's an artist, for example, where it's easy to see, like, your father's a painter, right? Okay, they're a creator, they're an artist, right? And somebody like me, a lawyer, a lot of people would categorize it not. But I think, the best lawyers, and the part I love about law is the creative, is the creativity, is the building, is the figuring out, is the strategy. It's not sitting and documenting the 100th bond deal, which is why I didn't stay in big firm practice. So I think there's creativity and creation in every different field.
Yeah, number one, when you're, say, constructing a legal document for, say, bonds, number one, you're funding and financing creativity. And so that's, you're financing a company that's building things. And then number two is, I think also when you're constructing a deal, and now, tying a bit more into the kind of the deal making nature of it, things is, you're imagining all the possible futures, and you're painting a picture of what could happen in terms of both the best case scenario and in terms of the worst case scenario, and in terms of all the different unforeseen circumstances that potentially could occur, the unknown unknowns. And then you're trying to construct a framework in an agreement for people to buy into and work together constructively moving forward. And so I do think that being a lawyer is very creative. I think it's really actually, like, there's, in some ways, it's very much like very real and very, I would say it's like the height of creativity, but it's definitely a very high form of creativity. I definitely think, like, when you're constructing these legal documents and legal deals, and these deals could potentially create trillions of dollars or hundreds of billions of dollars in value to the world, and you're thinking of all the different scenarios, and you're constructing like ways of dealing with these different scenarios and such. And I think there really is an art to it. I don't think it's necessarily just like kind of cookie cutter kind of role at all.
Listen, not if you're doing it right, and not if you're really balancing, which, any great professional does. Yes, the pure legal, what's legal, what's not legal, but, the way to measure and account for risk, and also understand that there's deal momentum, also understand that entrepreneurs can be successful without taking risks. So you're not going to eliminate all risk, even though as a lawyer, you'd like to. But, so how do you identify risk? How do you balance that against opportunity? How do you make those decisions in a negotiation or in a structuring on how you're going to balance that risk versus opportunity? Negotiating is a creative art.
As the current president would say, there's the art of the deal. And I think there is something very real to that. I think there is an art. Like you are an artist of the deal. And I think that is, very, very, very true and very real.
Love it. What was your first deal of any type? I know, you mentioned one that was early. Maybe it was your first, in terms of raising capital in college. What was there an earlier deal of any type that you can think of?
Yeah, for sure. So I think I was telling you earlier that I was very creative as a kid, and I would draw paintings. I would construct buildings. And I actually sold them as artwork to actually the first money I ever made actually was I sold a piece of artwork to my grandmother. So it was like literally as like a 7-year-old, 8-year-old. And so that was probably my first deal, is creating a piece of art and then selling it to my grandmother, making money from it, and being like, wow, like there was definitely some that was really inspiring for me. I was also student council president. Basically, I was a kid that was student council president, class president every year since in 5th grade in tropical New York and Westchester. And so I was the kid that was always reelected. And one year the school said, you can't run because we got to give somebody else a chance. And then so I didn't run one year, but then I won the year after that. And so, but like that is also deal making every year as well. I mean, you understand what the factions are in your class or in the school, and and have to construct deals in some ways to get elected.
Sure.
And then once you're class president or school president, you have to construct deals with the president, the principal of the school, potentially the superintendents, the various other stakeholders, parents and things like this as class president, student council president. So you're interfacing with adults really as a 5th grader or 6th grader in that year. Yeah. And so, I think from a very young age, I had this like comfort with constructing deals and kind of holding my ground with people who are much significantly older and more intelligent and more knowledgeable than I am, and just gaining comfort in that as well. But also I think a certain maturity to understand the other person's perspective. And then, how do you construct ultimately, a situation that helps both parties, or, the parties are involved to kind of move forward in a productive way. And so, yeah, I think that was, a series of deal making in high school and in middle school. Yeah. And then obviously being an entrepreneur and starting companies in college was, a big part of being a deal.
Let's talk about that college experience a little bit, because obviously, not that many people raise money, have venture-backed companies that early, although obviously, being in tech and Harvard and MIT and whatever, there's an ecosystem and, around those schools, and especially in the tech area where there is, access to the potential financing and, and student stuff. But tell us a little bit more about that experience though, because listen, for somebody who is an experienced business person, raising capital is always a big decision, and it changes dynamics, and you have new stakeholders to talk to, and they may have expectations about, growth and things like that. So talk to us, about that experience as a student raising capital like that.
Well, I mean, raising capital is really hard, and it's always hard. And it's always, at least for me, it's always been hard. I've started companies that aren't in education or in advertising. These aren't necessarily the most sexiest, highest flying, types of businesses. And so, it does require, a certain level of grit and tenacity to raise capital in these industries and to build a business also in these industries. And so I was very lucky that I got into an incubator junior year of college called Dream Adventures, and they're originally based in Philly, but I think I went through to the program in New York with my roommate. We had started a company together, and I learned a lot through that experience of being in the incubator and just learning how to pitch to investors, how to construct, how to build an MVP, how to get users, how to get signups. And I was with, we were by far the youngest people in this cohort. I mean, mostly everyone else was like adults essentially. And some of the other people in this incubator accelerator, really, it was kind of like model after Y Combinator, but a lot fewer companies. Yeah. I mean, I learned a lot from my batchmates as well, in terms of like being a CEO or being an executive or being a founder or being, we were doing really all these things and kind of hearing their stories and just developing relationships that end up being valuable advisors to this day. Like I would say some of my advisors, people that are my network of people I ask for advice, I actually come back to that very first summer through an incubator during college. And so there's that. I mean, Harvard also has the Harvard Innovation Lab, which is kind of the incubation office right next to the business school. And I was also very lucky to get into that program through my companies. Both companies had office space there. And there I'm sitting, next to HBS, Harvard Business School students who, worked at McKinsey for 2 years or worked at some high-flying law firm or a bank for 2 years, went to business school and wanted to start a company. And so then I learned a lot from them as well, like literally just sitting next to them. Because I was basically at the Harvard Innovation Lab all day, all week. I graduated from college and most people didn't know that I was even in their class because I was just so doing my own thing throughout it. They were like, wait, you're in our class? I've never seen you. It's because I was just at the Harvard Innovation Lab. I was at the Harvard Business School. I was, grinding on my startups. And so, but I learned a lot from them, like raising venture is about raising the least amount of money you need to get you to that next milestone. And
Yes.
how do you work through things like dilution and investor relationships? And how do you cold email an investor? And what are good resources to learn and read regarding how to, build a company? And so, yeah, I mean, as a college student studying computer science, being at the Harvard Innovation Lab, sitting next to Harvard Business School students who are also starting companies and running companies and raising money, I learned a lot through them as well. So basically, last 2 years in particular, last 3 years of college was, yeah, during the school year, I'm at the Harvard Innovation Lab, grinding on my company, sitting next to HBS students. And in summers, I'm at an incubator with other college people much older than me, running a company, and then back to, grinding next, at the Harvard Innovation Lab. And so there's that. And at the same time, Harvard computer science was starting to get very popular around 2011, 2012, 2013. There started to be a lot of startup clubs as well. And so we'd have like alumni, like really, famous alumni, Harvard alumni come and give talks at Harvard. I think like Paul Graham came to Harvard and, gave a little speech at Harvard. And I think we had Dustin Moskowitz give a little presentation when I was a student. And so you also see a lot of the kind of big figures in tech come to your school, and it's like they're real people and they're right in front of you and they're talking about starting a company and what it takes, what it's like. And then at the same time, I'm studying computer science. And so that was also my entire peer group is like interning at Google and Facebook and Box and and Pinterest. And so I think I was very lucky that like immediately upon entering freshman year, I'm in kind of the tech ecosystem of the larger, engineering culture. These are all people interning at these big tech companies, founders coming back to school to give talks, being part of these incubation programs. And I think Harvard did a really great job there of building that ecosystem and pivoting really to being around that period. And so I was very much a beneficiary of that.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I mentioned the ecosystem, that you're right, the timing. And yeah, I'm curious, in those early pitches for capital, like maybe disaster stories or just mistakes you made. I remember the first time I started listening to podcasts, we had Alex Bloomberg, who founded Gimlet Media and was the startup podcast, right? He came and spoke at EO, an entrepreneurs organization event years ago. And, at that point podcasts have been around for a while, but I wasn't really a podcast listener. And he told the story of starting, his podcast. For anybody who's in the audience who never listened to it, it's, he always joked, it's very meta. It's a podcast about starting a podcast company, right? And he was very open and whatever. And in fact, he shared it not only about, but actual recordings of, his pitch to Chris Sacca, which went horribly wrong the first time around, because he was, was a public radio guy. He was super nervous, right? And he's pitching this major investor. He has his slides or whatever. And Sacco was like, let's take a walk and you'll pitch me on the way. So now he doesn't have his slides with him. He doesn't have whatever. And it turned out, by the way, he circled back around and ended up getting investment from Sacco later. So I don't know, any like early, challenge or issue stories around the pitches before you got it down?
Yeah, gosh, no. And the founder of Gimlet, I was very lucky. I met him, I saw him as also present. I kind of gave a speech after he sold Gimlet to, I think it was Spotify for a lot of money. And yeah, really being inspired by his story as well. Really, real visionary and seeing, really just clearly how things were to come. And now obviously humongous. Yeah, in terms of early stories with pitches, gosh, it's, for me, I don't have any like crazy pitch stories like that. I think because I've been, in tech and as an entrepreneur for my entire career. So I've done so many hundreds and hundreds of pitches that like they all kind of, there's not really any that stick out. I do remember the ones that worked out well.
Let me ask a different question then. So, because there's some people like personality wise, right? Obviously you have been successful at raising from more than one company for raising capital, but if you've done hundreds of pitches like everybody else has, the majority of the results of those pitches are no, right? Or pass. So talk to me a little bit about what it takes, because I think there's two aspects of it. There's a certain kind of personality that can take the rejection, so to speak, and knows that's part of the game, and others who can't. And then also once you raise the capital, there's a certain kind of personality of people who like just would never be, listen, I raise money for real estate investment funds, stuff like that, whatever. And I had to go through the analysis of like, oh, being responsible for someone else's money. Like, and I, like there's a whole thing around that some people aren't willing to do. And, and obviously you sort of grew up in this ecosystem where it was more normal, right? To both deal with rejection from pitches and also be responsible for other people's money. But anything around that journey that, like, does it just roll off your back when somebody passes, an investor?
Well, I mean, definitely take the responsibility of stewarding someone's capital very, very seriously. This is how I've been an entrepreneur for so long and, kept the company alive for so long. And we're very, very, I would say the word stingy, but like just very capital efficient. And,
Yes.
and definitely, even those first, companies, I bootstrapped those companies initially. I self-financed it or, like so sometimes like, go beg to your parents for like, hey, I know we saved this money for my grad school. I don't need to go to grad school. I'm not going to grad school. Can we just put this money into the company? And so I treat it like it's my own money. I don't treat it like it's someone else's money. And I treat every investor's money like it's, like my life depends on making $1 every dollar here, $2 or $10 or really $1 million. And so I take that very seriously. I think in terms of how does one become successful at fundraising, I think you have to be a company that deserves capital. Especially myself, I'm not, I'm very lucky to go to Harvard, but, I'm also not, there's definitely like my background is kind of mixed in both. One can see raising capital, but also difficult raising capital in some ways as well. And so I think I've always had to build a company that deserves capital and that attracts capital. And that means just being really truthful, really transparent with the investors, and actually putting the work to build a company that people want to invest in, which is high growth, high margins, innovative product, innovative technology, compelling team. And like, so how are you successful in raising capital? I wish I could just say, you say these 3 magic words and you get the money, but that's not the case. The way you become successful at raising capital is you got to build a company that people want to invest in. And that's where, you have to use a lot of brain cells to be like, what is, like building an innovative product and finding a valuable opportunity in the market that you're executing against and that you're showing traction against executing. And sometimes you have to work harder than anyone else. And, you see so-and-so raising insane amounts of money with just a pitch deck or something. And it's very frustrating because, you're working so hard and you feel like you've accomplished so much more and yet you're not able to raise similar amounts of money. And so I think ultimately you just have to build a business that's growing fast and is like, it is like a good investment. And I think in some ways, as much as it's like, there's that other quotes like, how do you get good at dating? And it's like, whatever, you have all these different dating tricks, but ultimately it's like, you just work on yourself. And then that's like the best way to become successful at dating is just work on yourself. And I think there's an element there as well with capital. And I think that's kind of the realization I had pretty early on was like, I just have to do the work and I have to build a good company. And for Omneky, I bootstrapped the company really for the first 2 years. Like I literally lived hand to mouth, bootstrapping company with not very a lot of success raising capital. And I bootstrapped some million in revenue. And only then was I able to, start raising capital. So like, sometimes you do need to just grind and do the hard work and just be like, so it's just like a no-brainer. It's like, why wouldn't you invest in this company?
Yeah. Let's take a break from the show for a minute so I can tell you about an incredible resource my team and I have put together for you. Secrets of Deal-Driven Growth, Creative Ways to Grow Your Business Even in Challenging Times, is a powerful ebook that helps you take DealQuest podcast episodes and apply them to your own life and business. This is the ideal tool for anyone looking for creative ways to grow as deal makers, and you can get yours now. It's as easy as heading to coreycupford.com/workbook and downloading your copy. While you're there, you can also consider joining our dynamic deal-driven community of founders, experts, small business owners, and entrepreneurs. Now back for the show. So I want to talk about more how you achieved that with Omneky, but before we go there, I do want to spend a couple of minutes before I come back to that on the sale of your first company, right? So, you're a student, you raised some capital, you created this on-demand tutoring app, Quick Help. Did somebody approach you? Did you decide it was time to put it on the market? What was the impetus for the sale? And talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I think, going back, to the point of building, focusing on building a good company is as long as you do that, a lot of other things happen as a byproduct of that focus. And so I don't think one is ever in the market of selling your company because it's like, nobody wants to buy a company that's for sale. Ultimately, I don't think, or you're not definitely in a high leverage situation. if you're in the market, like trying to sell your company. I did not intend on selling my previous company. I was thinking of working on that company for 10, for a long time. I mean, education is something that I care a lot about. I think I care a lot about learning. I'm very passionate about that, what that mission was, which was empowering students to learn. And I think we're seeing a lot of the vision ultimately was something along the lines of what we see today with ChatGPT and kind of the on-demand personalized tutoring through kind of an AI. And so that was something that I was very excited about. But, through the process, I think trying to raise money for that company, I met founder Naguib Sawiris, who was founder of a competing education platform, and he offered to buy the company. And in that instance, it was like, 1 + 1 = 10. And I felt like I still had a lot to learn about how to run a company. And I was struggling, definitely in some ways, like in terms of learning, like even all the stuff that I learned, in these incubators and working at the iLab and all these other things, but still I felt like the best way I could do this was to move to Silicon Valley and learn from another startup that raised more venture. And so I did that. I spent a year and a half, working for Naguib, running marketing, where I learned like, okay, well, how does one run a Silicon Valley company in Silicon Valley in San Francisco? And then I started my next company and Naguib was our first investor. And so, yeah, I think it was like, for me, it was less about, I was looking to sell my company, but it was more like I was seeking to learn. I saw this opportunity to learn to become a better entrepreneur and be a better founder and be a better CEO. And that I felt like I was going to progress faster on that goal by selling, by working with Naguib than by working by myself. And so that was the calculus behind selling the company.
Love it.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk a lot more about what Omneky does and its growth. And maybe we can sort of parallel, like, I like the way you started out saying, hey, the first 2 years we bootstrapped this thing, right? Built it to X, and then we first raised capital. So maybe we can sort of parallel this conversation of how you create a great company that is investable, that people want, right? With what Omneky does, with what the funding journey was sort of at various benchmarks. So give us that journey and also let us know, in much more detail than we did in the bio about what you guys do and who you serve.
Yeah. Well, what Omneky does is we generate and scale omni-channel advertising campaigns. So ultimately, very simply, I'm sure some of your listeners are running ads or thinking about running ads. They're, if you have a business, you want visitors to your site. Most people are looking to get more visitors and get more traffic. And most people have probably heard of that as advertising as a way of achieving this. But, advertising is not very effective for most people who do it. You waste a lot of money. And partly it's because it's very hard to create compelling content that scales to vast parts of the markets that you're seeking. And that's partly because of design constraints. It's really hard to create content for all the people that you want to be customers for your business. And so the opportunity I saw was that AI could generate personalized content for every potential customer and help businesses grow by lowering the cost of creating content, lowering the cost of running successful ad campaigns, and driving higher ROI in the ad spend. And so that was really the idea back in 2017, 2018. I mean, that's why the company Omneky is called Omneky. Is, Publicis is the largest, Publicis, Omnicom now is the largest PR, ad holding company. So Omneky is kind of named after that. Publicis is the second largest. They have a golden lion as a logo. So we have the same gold color and it's a monkey. And Omneky is kind of an anagram monkey. And so kind of the thesis from day one for me was that this ad agency system, the creative industry is kind of broken because a lot of this isn't working for business owners and advertisers, and they're wasting a lot of money, and that AI can make it way more efficient, and that there's an opportunity to build a generative AI company, a big generative AI company in the space. And so that was kind of impetus. And I think even in 2017, 2018, you tell that vision to people, nobody really gets it. I think, it's like AI, is that a real thing? Is that vaporware? It's, people have been saying AI for a long time, but no one really viscerally felt AI actually working. And so, it's like AI is this thing that's going to come in the future, but it's always like 5 years in the future kind of situation. And so that was kind of the landscape which I'm now pitching, an AI company for advertisers. And then at the same time, I think in advertising, has historically been an area that's very competitive. Partly because there's so much budget and there's so much, it's a humongous industry. And so where there is money, there's a competition.
Sure.
And so it was viewed as like a very competitive industry, which is advertising, plus a very nascent technology, which is AI. And so it was just very difficult for me, even as a serial entrepreneur who studied computer science at Harvard, to raise capital. And so I had to just bootstrap the business. I had to, with whatever means that I had, all my savings, everything, just lend that to the company and build an MVP, get some initial customers, and bootstrap to build a business model and bootstrap to millions of dollars in revenue. And that's what we did. And then I think around 2020, we see increase. So our very first version of the product, well, yeah, so that was kind of like the initial kind of impetus behind the founding of the company and kind of the earliest fundraising.
Yeah. Let's talk about that transition from the bootstrapping, the vision, the whole thing, getting the traction you need, and then deciding. Because listen, here's the other thing that I think a lot of first-time founders underestimate, and that is the amount of time, energy, focus, distraction raising capital can be to running your company, especially, obviously if you got to the point where you've bootstrapped it and did it on your own and built a, super strong management team, or you're hired a corporate development, whatever. You have people who can dedicate to the fundraise. But a lot of companies, especially on their initial fundraise, aren't at that point where they got to both raise capital and run the company still. So talk to me about sort of that initial capital raise and where you were at with all that, and what obviously you built organically enough growth then to be attractive, I guess, to investors where you weren't, in the beginning.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that.
Yeah, sure. And so I think, it goes back to the thing, which is you want to be like a no-brainer investment. So for example, if we are a company making millions of dollars a year, growing 2-3x year over year, and that is kind of annoying, like, depending on the valuation that you're seeking,
sure,
there's a valuation in which that is a no-brainer for investors.
Sure.
And so I think it's so spending a couple of years doing the work to make oneself a deal that is like, people would want to invest in. Even then, people are like, I don't believe this growth will continue, or, like this is not scalable or whatever, right? There's, this space is going to keep getting more competitive. And so there's, like, even if you've built like the company that you think is the most fundable, it has like 3x year-over-year growth, it's profitable, it's millions of dollars of revenue, you have a great team, even then, it's not easy to raise capital. Even then, well, facing tons and tons of rejection. But it's a lot easier to raise, like when you're like that, and also you have time on your side. And so, yeah, I think for me, the focus has always been more on building a great company than raising capital, and building a company that people want to invest in more than maybe potentially to my detriment, even like developing, maybe further developing investor relations or something like this. And the reason why is that, like, being in this industry for some time, you see different paths to being an entrepreneur. So for example, you see people who are former VCs raise capital, but like, you don't always see that, usually don't see that work out well for like, or at least it doesn't become these massive outcomes. And I think it's ultimately because capital is not an end. It's a means to building your business. And so just like, I think if you view it like that, then therefore the focus should always be on building a great company first, and then being a company that people want to invest in, and then raising capital as part of that process. Then I'm in the market. It goes back to this idea of like, I'm in the market to sell my company, or I'm in the market to raise capital. I'm in the market to, like, these goals can be achieved a lot more successfully if you go about them obliquely in some ways than trying to like straightforward being like, that's what I want to achieve. And so the focus should be, as an entrepreneur, which is the purpose of an entrepreneur, is to build a great product and build a great company based on product or service. And but particularly, I think it has to be a scalable product, or kind of a story there, at least when you're raising to investors.
Yeah. Yeah. Love that. All right. So tell us a little bit more about what types of clients Omneky works with, who's the ideal client or customers, or whether it's size, industry, et cetera. And then I want to close out with the last few questions.
Sure. So we have hundreds of customers. Majority of our customers are SMBs. These are, our product starts at $99 a month. There's a 7-day free trial. Anybody can sign up and start generating really, I think, the highest quality ads. And that's why we do a free trial. Anyone can try out for the product for ourselves. We have a very high conversion rate from free trial to paid. So I think the conversion rates speak for themselves in terms of the value and the quality of our product. And, these could be a local services company. If you are a local roofing company and you need to run ads to get more leads from your community, that we have customers like that. If you are a D2C founder selling products like e-commerce products, we have many customers like that. If you are a financial services company, or you're kind of an online services company looking to get leads, we have a lot of self-service customers like that. If you're a travel company looking to sell different destinations, we have many customers like that. And so these SMB customers continue to be the kind of majority and bulk of our customers. And then we have the sizable mid-market and enterprise part of the business as well. So some of the largest Fortune, some of the 100 largest companies in the world, 1 or 2 of them are also customers of ours. And so, we're slowly breaking into that top 100 market cap companies who are paying customers. But, the bulk of our customer base is SMBs and mid-markets. people looking to scale, grow their businesses, and they're using our tool to make advertising work for them.
Love it. Love it. And you can share as much as a little of, of this. I'm not asking for anything, any confidential information or whatever, but it's interesting because I love the focus you have on building a great company, right? And, this idea that, hey, capital will come if you do that. And, also this, with your first company that when you mentioned like doing sort of shopping around a company that's building a great company, and then somebody comes to you and says, oh, we want to buy you a great company.
Yeah,
Right?
just the effort it takes, I think, to like go shop a company or to just spend that energy building a great company. I think it's like way more ROI, positive use of your time to just spend the time focusing on building a company than trying to shop it. Though that said, there are certain kinds of ideas that you can't pursue unless you have capital. And so therefore, I think you also need to be, but there again, you have to put in the work and put in a very concrete plan that makes sense to the investors on the upside and downside protection regarding the possible fundability of this deal.
Yeah, no question.
And I think a lot of that ultimately has to come down to yourself as, are you a credible vehicle for this deal that you're selling? Like, does your story match the opportunity that you're presenting to investors? Why?
Yes.
Because even if investors believe that this pitch makes sense or this business idea makes sense, there's still a couple, at least probably a dozen other companies that look similar that they can invest in. And so then the question ultimately is, why should I invest in you to pursue this plan versus somebody else? And therefore, you need to have a very good story and a very good relationship that built trust with investors so that they're willing to kind of give you the resources you need to go and pursue that plan. But
Yeah. So in that vein, going forward, I'm curious, and again, you can share as much or little as you want. One of the things that happens, like you've raised capital now, right? And, depending upon who your investors are and what their time horizons are and what type of capital it is, and, whether they have, a fund that they have to return to investors or whatever, often raising capital does create this one sort of focus on accelerating growth. And then two, having an exit plan, right, where your investors can get their money out, whether that's through a larger PE firm or VC, whatever, or whether that's selling or whether that's going public or whatever it is. And so, you don't have to share any specific plan, but like that balance between, hey, I just want to focus on building a great company, and that's how I'll get investment. But then once you get investment, right, there are certain expectations that a lot of investors have. So what's the future plan for Omneky going forward in light of all that?
Well, right. Well, I think Omneky can be I honestly think Omneky can be a $1 trillion company. I think Omneky can get to billions of dollars in revenue. I think we have a clear path to hundreds of millions in revenue, and we're executing against that goal. I think we'll raise additional capital as we go down this path, and we'll probably, IPO sooner than later. That's one of my goal is to IPO Omneky. And I think, at every step of the way, it's about constructing these deals that you deeply understand the incentives and objectives of every single person at the table. What is their downside they're trying to protect against? What is their objective? What is their allocation of their time and resources across their various opportunities? And then ultimately for yourself, how do you protect your downside or their downside in case unforeseen or, not ideal outcome happens, which is often the case. And so you have to be like a realist and kind of game out all these different scenarios and then protect yourself against, if God forbid something, that wasn't a part of the original plan happens. That's, I think, a large part of, but I think the best deals are, win-win, like everybody benefits from a good deal. And I think, especially when you're in a growing economy, in a growing pie and in a growing industry, it's easier to construct win-win deals than maybe it is in a shrinking economy or in a shrinking industry or in a stagnant industry. And so what I've been very lucky that I've been in tech in America, which is the fast growth of the fast growth industries. And so it's easier to construct win-win agreements. I was very lucky to be able to, in this environment. I think I would be I don't know if I would have been successful. And I'm not saying I am successful today, but I don't think I would have been in different kinds of environments. So yeah, I think it helps be an American technology company. And I think then it helps me, obviously many other things, studying computer science and going to Harvard and all these things also help. But I think ultimately you have to create these every single step of the way. You have to create a win-win deal with every single player that you are interfacing with. And sometimes it honestly, it's better to leave some money on the table because at the end of the day, it doesn't end at the deal. The deal is the starting point of a relationship.
I say that all the time. I'm so glad that you said it. I always say that a deal is the starting point or continuation, right, of a relationship, because you could be doing a deal with somebody already.
Yeah.
And that's a piece that people miss so often. And my listeners will know that you just said like nearly the exact words that I say all the time. And I try to get people. In fact, it's funny. I won't spend a lot of time, but I was speaking at an EO women's event. They had me come in for the EO women's committee in Montreal. And one of the things I said to them, not to gender stereotype, but I said that men are much more looked at, as deal makers. We have all the stats on the percentage of companies that are, or raise money and all this stuff, whatever. But I said, there's something internal, because a lot of women have said to me, I don't think of myself as a deal maker. And one of the things I say to them is, listen, if anything, women are a hell of a lot better in general, right, as a general statement on relationships than men are. So you guys should actually be the best deal makers in the world. And a lot of times that recontextualizes the conversation of being a deal maker in their mind, because they have this other view of what that means.
I totally agree with you. I think this is also why we were seeing a lot more female success and participation in the business world, is because, now actually a lot of very successful business leaders are women, precisely because I think a good deal is ultimately a good relationship. And so like, even if you pinch pennies and you win every single nickel in that deal is going to fall apart day two if you haven't constructed in a way, because at the end of the day, a deal is this, to your point, an agreement to build future value together, whether that is, your company is now merged, or you raise capital from an investor, or you have some kind of business partnership. And if it isn't equitable or fair, there will be resentment on one side, and eventually it'll fall apart. And so maybe, maybe like, and at the end of the day, the other important thing is that in business, your reputation is like the most important thing. And so if you have a string of deals that have fallen apart, and maybe you nickeled every single dollar and then they all fell apart, then you're not going to have a very long business career either. So
Agreed.
Like viewing deals as a starting point or middle, like beginning of a new relationship, and caring about your reputation in the business world, and caring about following through with what you say, what you do, and executing ultimately, is the most important part of having successful deals in the future. Like, you got to do those things, because every time you do that, then the next deal can be bigger. The next deal can be more successful. The next deal can be with bigger players. And that means that at the end of the day, that each deal has to benefit the other party, potentially even more than your party and than yourself. And
love it.
And yeah, and so I think that mentality of having like the ultimate, business is an infinite game, right? We're playing, it's a long-term game. Your career is a long-term game. And so like having that perspective, that long-term perspective about your reputation and your career, and it is very important when you're in that moment where you're constructing a deal with another partner.
No question. So Hikari, if people want to find out more about Omneky, about everything you're up to, what's the best way for them to do that?
www.omneky.com is our website. That's the best place. You can sign up for a free trial there. You can also follow us on socials. We're on X, we're on Facebook, we're on Google and YouTube. And so we're on Reddit. And so, you can follow us there. You can email me at hikari@omneky.com. And yeah, we're looking forward to seeing you ideally sign up to create an account, or, through an email, or following us on socials, or, just reaching out to me directly on LinkedIn. Yeah.
Sounds great. My final question on the podcast is always about my highest value in life, which is freedom. And for me, that means everything from freedom from around the world for people against, from oppression to why I've been an entrepreneur for decades and haven't had a boss. What does freedom mean to you, and how does it impact your life and business?
Yeah, I think freedom is the ability to choose what you want to do, who you want to do it with, and it is not necessarily a life of no responsibility. I think there is responsibility in freedom, but kind of doing it on your terms, ideally, or at least in terms of which you agree with. And so, I think that one could also potentially tie in some element of like optionality or something like this. Yeah, I think generally, being able to call your own shots and live the life the way you want to live it, whatever. And again, that vision is different for every person. And so I think freedom means different things to different people based on their goals in life and what they find enjoyment in. And so, I think just living life in your own terms and getting what you want out of life.
Love it. Hikari Senju, thanks for being such a great guest on the Deal Quest podcast.
Thank you, Corey.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of Deal Quest, where we help you understand how deal-driven growth can be your ticket to freedom. If you are interested in finding out more about my law firm, the services we provide to entrepreneurial and growing companies across industries all over the country, and my partner Brian Megan and I, and my amazing team, just head over to kupferlaw.com. That's kupferlaw.com. And if you want to follow more of my content, head over to my LinkedIn page where I post regularly. I'm Corey Kupfer. Until next week, wishing you the freedom and financial prosperity that I know your deal quest will bring.